Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We are here with the one and only Benjamin C. George. If you've been watching or if you've been listening and paying attention to the podcast or the channel, then you have seen some previous conversations. You probably know about his book, No Absolutes, a framework for life. You have probably seen us move off onto some different tangents. I hope they've been somewhat interesting. I know that we have been having an awesome conversation, and we're looking forward to this one, which I think we're going to start off with choosing your words wisely. But before we start on that, I want to turn it over to Mr. Wizard himself. And is there anything you want to say before we get started here?
Well, not particularly, except I do admire your 3D printer in the background there. Uh,
Nice.
I'm staring at one in front of me, and I think we might have the same one actually.
The
Uh,
Creality?
yeah, I have an Ender 5. Yeah,
That's what I got too. Yep.
yeah, that's what I thought. All right. Well, so purchasing choices are important too.
Yes, consumption habits, right?
Indeed.
I think it says something about someone who purchases something that can build the things that they want to purchase.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many. I'm sure you've discovered this. I love that thing.
Yeah.
Just watching it actually 3D print is a mesmerizing experience. And to think that, that technology has been around since the 70s, but was under copyright for, up until what, 2003, I think it was.
Man, I did not know that was. I think I may have heard that in passing, but I was unaware of that.
Oh, yeah. They used to call them rapid prototyping machines, and they would cost $250,000.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now,
Rapid
obviously,
prototyping.
yeah. And they weren't too much different from what you got behind you right there. Back then, I mean, obviously there was some, whole room size ones that they had for, CNC type stuff, but yeah, rapid prototyping machines, and it was under patent until 2003, I think, somewhere around there. And then that's when 3D printers came on the market, like it was a new technology, but it'd been around for a minute.
Yeah, I've seen a couple. I think maybe on Discovery Channel or something. They showed a picture of like them 3D printing a house with like the blocks and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I actually worked with a company in Colorado here. They do that up in the mountains, and it's a really interesting process. It's the exact same idea as your 3D printer. There, you just create a frame, a rail frame that this nozzle runs on, and instead of heating up plastic and printing out plastic, it's concrete typically, or some geopolymer or something like that.
Wow. Yeah, it seems fascinating to me. In a way, pretty much in a way, the idea of the 3D printer fits nicely into what we're talking about because you know, if you look at the way in which you put in the raw materials and then all of a sudden this idea begins to get formed, it begins to shape up. The same way it seems our words, like the I think I heard it once said that your ideas become thoughts. Your thoughts become your words, and your words become your actions. So it's like this idea of you having these things in your mind, and then you're translating that vision into reality. And then all of a sudden you have this goal or this thing that gets outputted that way. And
Mhm.
I think it's a good way to think about it. When you wrote a chapter in your book called Choose Your Words Wisely, what can
Mhm.
you start us off with? Like, what can you just give us a breakdown of what that means to you?
Definitely. As I was, still to this day, I mean, you don't have to look too far around to see, people making declarative statements that are, absolutes that, identify them in one way or another, however that's perceived. And then you'll see, these same people make another declarative statement that kind of contradicts their last one. And then if you stretch the time frame out, you'll see just a long series of contradictions. Well, how are you supposed to take somebody like that seriously at a logical, reasonable level? Uh, and to me, you really can't. I mean, somebody like that, somebody who's going to just make statements like that is they're trying to get your money, your attention, or more than likely both.
Yeah.
And in terms of how it fits into the actual structure of what it means to be a human, how you operate on a daily life, when you choose your words wisely, when you are aware of the perspective that you're painting with your words, not only to yourself
Mm.
but to other people, now you have control over, how you're perceived, but also how you can perceive other people's actions and in their words. And through that, it gives you the ability to shift perspectives, have multiple perspectives, be more aware of the situations, the subjects that you're looking into, that you're researching, the conversations you're having, etc.
Do you? I really like the words you chose there about painting a perspective for somebody. Like I think that that is true. Like you are painting a perspective. Sometimes you're painting the other perspectives a different color or a different shade.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're doing that in order to so you can understand it. Other times you're doing that because you don't really like their picture. And the same is true of the words you use when you paint yourself a perspective. I Another one I like to use if we use the analogies like that is choosing your words as a linguistic pathway, the same way you would choose a pathway in life. If you can maybe choose some different words that people don't hear, you can make the pathway a little bit more scenic for people. But you can also go down a different road if you choose to use or see things differently. Just like, and I think
Yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
yeah, I think that might be part of the secret for living a life out of the ordinary is to see the world in a way that is different. And you can make a conscious decision to do that. Some people say, "Oh, well you just see things different. Oh, you're just different." But if you just it's a choice. Like if you choose to see it different, you can.
hmm Well, and if you look at it from that perspective too, what are the things that we attach to as a culture? Our stories. I mean,
Yeah.
the stories have driven our culture since the beginning of recorded time. This cycle around, uh, and when you have that type of, that's ingrained in us. That's part of who we are, and those stories are really what define everything in our world. And now it's a shame that we've gone from the epics of Homer, where
Mm.
people used to memorize these, thousands and thousands and thousands of words and orally regurgitate them in performances to 180 characters on Twitter. Now, one could argue both ways, I'm sure, but at the end of the day, there is something lost when we distill things down to just their minutia. Yes, it is a perspective, but at the same time, it's painting those perspectives with our words that allow us to create the imagery inside the head. To if the best stories you ever read are when you're reading it and you're in there, you're watching the characters move. Yeah, you're reading the words, but everything's alive in your head. You have this visual of faces, even of you have a whole idea of how the looks of the person are, how their demeanor is, how they walk, how they move throughout this world, and you're not in the book anymore, you're in this story. And when we can paint those stories for ourselves, especially, now you get to walk and live this story, as opposed to just rambunctiously moving around and looking at headlines and popping out a 180 character tweet. Oh, I guess
Yeah.
it's 240 now, isn't it? I'm old.
Man, I think that touches upon what Marshall McLuhan used to talk about digital feudalism. I think back in
Mhm.
the 60s, he spoke about hot and cold mediums. And a hot medium is a way of consuming information that puts the idea in your head preconceived. It's like a happy meal, comes with a cheeseburger and fries. Like you know what you're getting. Like so TV gives you the whole story without you having to do any work. Like you don't have to imagine the character. You don't have to imagine if I say to you she clicked her ruby red slippers 3 times, you may think that they're green ruby slippers, but when you watch The Wizard of Oz, it's they're red ruby slippers and I see her pan down and they have straps. Like
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, it's a work of art because someone has imagined it for you, but in other ways, it is robbing you of the ability to create your own mental images. And I think that, well, what Marshall McLuhan said is the problem with that is it allows your imagination to atrophy, and then you kind of get where you are and you just have these preconceived notions, and it's this
Mm-hmm.
blah blah blase world of black and gray, and people stop thinking for themselves. And you could argue that that's kind of what the internet, at least on some level, is like TV times a million, because there's the images for you. You don't need to think. And that's,
Right.
if you can distill it down to 240 or 140, or shorts right now, be it TikTok or on YouTube, is like, hey, here's 30 seconds. There you go. Here's another 30 seconds. And then
Mm-hmm.
you've got it all. But it seems it seems that there is a campaign of sorts, and I don't know if it's evolutionary or commercial, that is trying to force us into ever smaller and smaller bite-sized chunks of reality.
I would argue it's more commercial.
Why would you say that?
Well, because you know, if you think about it, we've always exonerated the storytellers.
Yeah.
They've always, whether that be the author or the orator or, what have you, they've always been, central figures to society. And I think that is kind of the ingrained human experience. I think the idea that you can now take that, distill it down so you can have hundreds of these with, just minutes of time, and you could profit off of all of these. I think that is one of the primary drivers. Now, the amount of people who are able to profit off of it is also another driver for that, right? We're economically driven, whether you want to be or not. I mean, that's just kind of the reality of the situation we're in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I have like a love-hate relationship, but like I love it. I love that everybody can maybe make a short and get 1 million views and understand what that feels like. And in a way, it democratizes the Hollywood 15 minutes of fame. And maybe now, instead of 15 minutes of fame, everybody gets a minute of fame.
or or 15 seconds.
15 seconds, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, what was that? It was Vine. That was the first kind of popular video format back in the day, and those were only 6-second videos, if I recall, or something like that.
I don't know Vine.
Yeah, that was like the precursor to YouTube popularity, and it was just like little tiny snippets. And eh, I think there's a lot to be said for entertainment value about something like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, right? Look how many people sit there and scroll and scroll and scroll on their phones. Um, in terms of value to actual, like, growing a human, growing a culture, growing a community, growing a society, I think it's counterproductive, because you can't, and it's kind of the similar problem that we're facing on the political side of things. Is these are large problems that need, you know, really honest communication and logical debate and reasoned debate. And or I can get a whole bunch of people pissed off and I can write 240 characters and I can get more attention. So there's an inequality of value at the end of the day when it comes to, how much time is being put into this versus, what's actually coming out of it on the other end for the value to society. And I think, we're seeing it pretty by and large that you're not getting any good information from these types of sources. Yeah, you get entertainment, which is, there's a lot to be said about entertainment, but at the end of the day, I mean, what are we doing? Right? It's fine to, and I'm all for somebody, making $1 million as a TikTok star, doing silly things.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think, those silly things brought joy to people, and good on you. But at the same time, we're, as a society as a whole, there's not a platform, and podcasting's kind of getting there, right? But there's not a platform that really rewards the effort of the conversation, of actually having these long form discussions, trying to actually get to roots of problems, trying to find solutions, talking about solutions, why they may or may not work, etc. those things aren't rewarded in society, and at any echelons besides, this kind of emerging podcast scape.
Yeah, I agree. I I heard a recent comparison,
Mhm.
and they were saying that Twitter is sort of like the Tower of Babel, in that there's all these things like different cultures and languages just being put together in this giant tower. And on the bottom, you just have this tower where like it's just chaos. There's everybody there. No one's really paying attention to these people on the bottom. They have 2 or 3, like likes or whatever. And then as you rise up to the top, like on the top, you would have someone like Elon Musk that can tweet out, I like red cars, and it gets 1 million or like 3 million views, and it gets disseminated down the tower, and it's almost like a game of telephone by the time. Oh, what he's really saying is that he hates Ted Cruz because he had a red shirt on, or but it's this interesting idea. And that was the beginning of the comparison. And the end of the comparison was like, okay, if it's like the Tower of Babel, does that mean it's destroying our society, or does that mean it is a device that has destroyed society? And if you look at the way in which, I mean, you could make that argument. I don't know if that's true or not, but you could argue that Twitter is a device that has brought about in an effort that was told to unite us, has brought about chaos that is kind of destroying us.
Well, I mean, you could certainly make that argument, and I'd be happy to make that argument probably 6 days out of the 7 out of the week, right?
Right.
And then there's the one day where you can also make the argument that, the kind of ability to share and digest information at such a global scale, you definitely can have some benefit as well. But yeah, I would say more so towards the detracting side, simply because, again, you're not engaging in a great conversation on Twitter. It doesn't matter what sort of skills you have in language. Comedians can be quippy and funny. Politicians can be divisive and all for their tribe. And sports fans can be hoo-hurrah. But you're not getting philosophical conversations. You're not getting artists being able to, share works of art, in a setting where, yeah, somebody might see it, but they're not going to sit and digest it, like somebody would at a gallery. And so it's very limiting to a lot of aspects of society. As an information source, it's fascinating, right? Um, I have a sentiment analysis bot that I built for Bitcoin, and it runs on Twitter, and so it's just constantly monitoring Twitter to see what people are talking about Bitcoin. And then I have words that are positive and negative, and it just keeps a running sentiment of what's going on, at the Twitter scale of Bitcoin and what people are thinking about it. And it's interesting because you see correlations to prices and other, like when big data, or like when a big story breaks or whatnot, you'll see the amount of sentiment go up, but you'll see the ratios of sentiment stay relatively the same for most things, until you see like Bitcoin just dropped dramatically. Then the sentiment went from bouncing from anywhere from minus 100 to plus 100, or in that range, to thousands of negative comments. And so you get to dissect information and from a different perspective, which is really neat from a data guy. But in terms of like improving our society, yikes, that's I don't think so.
Does your Twitter bot have laser eyes?
No laser eyes. I'm very much of the mind. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
That's super funny. Agreed. Okay, just staying with that for a minute, like it makes me wonder, can you see trends with that analysis before big price drops, or
Yeah.
typically, what can you see?
Typically, because what's going to happen is there's always going to be a subset of people who are really in tune, really tuned in. They follow everything, PR releases from every company, et cetera, et cetera. And those are always going to be the first bits of information that start off these little like cascades, like you threw a pebble in a pool and the
Hmm.
ripples start to expand out. And as those ripples expand out, they get more and more people and build more and more ripples. And so you kind of see like epicenters of these things occur. And if you track the epicenters over time, you'll see that the epicenters perceive price movements pretty correlated. Um, so you could do a lot with that information, right? You can have trading bots,
Yeah.
which I do, and but you can analyze that information to kind of see how information flows through society as it is today, and it's fast. It's so
Yeah.
fast. It's gotten faster. Um, Back when because I've been doing automation stuff and bot stuff for quite some time. When I first started monitoring data like this, you would see like an epicenter, and then you would see like it slowly kind of grow, and you could see viral points and things like that. But now things are so connected. There's so many, networks of people sharing stuff and whatnot that is, you see these things spark off, and then they're boom, they're in the zeitgeist almost, within 24 hours typically.
Yeah, see that brings me to another slice of Twitter. Like it's clearly used to foment riots and information and disinformation. And it is a world of propaganda genius if you want to instill a narrative or a worldview or some sort of information, be it true or false, into the general public. If you think about it as like a nervous system, and you can get out information fast, like you said, faster than we've ever seen before. Like
Mm-hmm.
it could be a machine, or it could be a instrument for extreme awesomeness. And in some ways it is. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, and then it gets back to the bots. Like there's clear there's clearly bots out there that are meant to manipulate, some for profit, some for propaganda. And do you think that when I hear Elon and the Twitter board fighting about bots and fake accounts,
Mm-hmm.
this particular idea of bots didn't enter my zeitgeist or my mind. But yeah, bots are pretty effective at doing the things they're programmed to do. What other kind of bots are out there that maybe people haven't thought about?
Oh, all sorts of things. Back when I first got involved in the whole bot thing, it was I was trying to build bots to, you know, build social media clout.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had, and I know more advanced bots and people who were doing much more advanced stuff than this, but I would have bots that would go out and create a social media profile, propagate it with pictures, and then have a series of texts, to pick from 100 or 200 different things, and it would just constantly tweet out, and then, you know, uh, another thing that I do is like if somebody mentions philosophy, for instance, they'll get a message from my Mr. Wizard account. Says, hey, would you be my friend? And if they acknowledge my friend request, then it says, hey George, thanks for being my friend on Twitter. By the way, I just wrote this new book, No Absolutes: A Framework for Life. Would you mind take a look at the preview and let me know what you think about it? So now I can effectively be, 3 or 4 different people in a marketing team, and I can duplicate that process by just copying the code and having it run on a different account. And so now imagine if you're doing this for a narrative, for propaganda. And so there's very advanced systems out there that will go off and they'll scrape images from Facebook profiles, from Instagram, and they'll recreate profiles on other social media sites using those, real person, and even a lot of their thoughts and whatnot, but then they'll interlace, propaganda messages, or you'll
Mm.
see that account always respond to somebody who's in a position of power or authority, like the president or something like that. And and there's all sorts of these things for every single social media platform, and it's almost to the point where unless you're a big brand, you really or you have a lot of friends or a huge network, it's the only way to kind of compete in this type of marketplace. Um, or as you know, it takes 3 years of consistency, consistency,
Yeah,
consistency, and who
yeah.
has the time for consistency anymore for 3 years, right?
Yeah, right? It's like a lifetime. Yeah, it's so fascinating in so many ways, and it it takes a lot of mental horsepower to stay focused on something when you're not getting the results that you want to get or that you think that maybe you deserve. However, I think that that's something that everybody should know is whether you believe you can, whether you believe you can't, either way, you're right. And if you want to be successful, you have to continue to be consistent, like you said. And I think that gets back to our words and our mental framework
Indeed.
of of presenting things in a way, using the right language and presenting ideas that are realistic, even though the goal you might want to have is unrealistic. If you can take these realistic steps, one foot in front of the other, then you can reach unrealistic expectations in a lifetime. Might not
Hmm.
happen in a month or 6 months, but the path is right there and it can be done. Which sometimes I get caught up in, and I'm wondering if how you think about this. When we choose our words wisely, you know, the frameworks we have for life, we stumble upon this problem of nothing is true. What do you do? Like if we we never know everything about anything. So how can we continue to move forward in life and when we're faced with that particular obstacle?
I personally find it liberating and freeing.
Okay.
That means because that if because I remember when I was growing up, I really wanted to be an inventor. I had it in my head. It was one of the first things I wanted to do as a kid, right? And I remember my grandpa at the time, who, he actually had some patents and stuff. A really smart guy. He made a comment in passing, and it was, uh, "There's nothing left to discover," and it destroyed me as a kid. Destroyed me because I was like, "Oh man, there's nothing left to discover." And I was like, "Well, what can I invent?" Well, turns out there's a lot left to
Yeah.
discover. I think he just said it in passing just because it was a lull in technology. VHS had just come out. Everybody had a color television. The
Yep.
internet was there. What else is going to happen, right?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so having that freedom of knowing that, yeah, while there is a lot of really cool things that are pretty consistent that we've built our society upon, there's a whole universe out there of things that we're just unaware of, unexplored. And I think part of the human condition is we have an innate, desire to want to explore, uh, and that's expressed through artistically for people. It's expressed through adventure for other people. It's expressed through the books that people consume for some, et cetera, et cetera. But there is an ingrained kind of behavior of exploration to the human condition, and when you have the freedom of being able to look under every rock for your own perspective on it and not have to just accept that all rock under every rock it looks exactly the same and this is what you're going to see. That's a freeing and liberating thing for me personally.
Yeah, I would
and
agree.
and I think taking that type of perspective, yes, it can be disconcerting at times if you look at it from the perspective of, oh my gosh, well, maybe everybody's full of shit. What are we doing here? Are we just kind of we treading water? What's going on? Yeah, those types of things can cause some existential dread for people. But again, it's those perspective shifts of, well, yeah, but at the same time, that means that there's land on the horizon somewhere, and we just have to pick the direction, and we'll probably find it. And we don't have to sit here and tread water. And so, or looking out at like the political landscape, being like, is this all that we got? Can we not do any better? Well, if you have that idea that, these things are hard truths that are just absolutes that are part of society, death and taxes, um, yeah, that's going to be debilitating in its own right. And but now if you can look at that and you can be like, hey, there's a whole bunch of crazy people doing crazy things, and I think there are different ways to do this. Now all of a sudden, that dread goes away. So, it's a process, but through that process is definitely you gain a multitude of perspectives, and through that it allows the liberation of thought and action.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really well said. And I hope that more people will see the idea of the limits of truth as freeing, because the opposite of that is people that I've learned that people who say, look, I know I'm an expert in this, are usually full of shit. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that you could make the argument, and I try to do so a lot, that the majority of experts are just narrow-minded.
Right.
They have studied this one thing their whole life, and not to take anything away from the true experts out there that have studied and gone through and experienced so much stuff. However, it seems like authoritarianism is a form of absolutism, which is a form of truth. Hey, this is, and maybe it's their truth.
Mm-hmm.
Our history books are a form of our truth, but
Mm-hmm.
our history is different from a different culture's history. In fact, the individual's history is different from everybody else's history. And that's when you begin seeing that, it should be liberating. It should be like, wow, that means that I really don't have to listen to the person as an authority, because they're not really an authority. They really don't know. And maybe I should challenge them. And if I challenge them, maybe I'll learn something about me, or maybe I will learn why they think that, or maybe I will learn how they
Well,
got to that place.
ultimately, you're challenging yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you, and again, we touched on this in another one, but the word belief, it's
Mm.
a very dangerous word. If I believe somebody, I'm foregoing my ability to reason about this situation. I'm accepting their expertise as an absolute truth. Um, that's where we get into a lot of hangups in the world. We have, and this ties back into everything we've been talking about. If you have
Yeah.
education levels the way they are, et cetera, and all of these things, well, and when you combine all these factors, you get a lot of problems at scale, which we're seeing now.
Yeah, I think of it as like a balloon that you squeeze. Like
Mm,
education used to be this, you squeeze the balloon and we got education, where there was all this debate and there was all this, like a hive of buzzing bees trying to figure out a world that we can get honey out of, and then all of a sudden someone's like, hey, take it easy. This is how it is. And they push down
mhm.
on that balloon. And now the bubble comes out on this side, and it's the entrepreneur, and it is the kid who's smoking some bong loads in his basement challenging his teacher, and it's this idea of exploration has moved from the quote unquote best educational places to maybe the lower underground levels now. And maybe it's been like that for a long time, but you know i I think it is a liberating experience, and I hope more people choose to challenge authority. And maybe that's what's going on now, is that
Sure. Mm,
that's what's bubbling up from underneath. If you just peel back the onion and you say, wow, there sure looks like a lot of populist uprisings everywhere, you know, is it because of politics, or is it because the world has been captured with someone else's truth?
Well, I think it's definitely captured with somebody else's truth, right? Um, when we look at just kind of how all of this is unfolding, the individual is never represented. The whole idea behind this whole thing is that we have representation for the individual, but if you go talk to any individual, I would hazard a guess that up in the upper 90%, most of them are going to feel unrepresented just about a fair chunk of scales in their life, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is most people, you're on your own. You're with your family, your community. If you're lucky to have good friends, that's your group. That's your tribe of people who those are how you solve your problems. Those are how you get by. Those are your emotional, sticks in the ground. Those are everything that we use to navigate this life. And then you are beholden to some magical power that you really don't have any attachment to, but yet can change your life in an instant. That nobody likes to be told what to do, especially on a scale
Yeah.
like that. And I think because we have the ability to have, this global communication, I think a lot of people are realizing, hey, other people think this way too. Well, now I need to figure out, well, who should I listen to? And I think this is where we're getting a lot of these, uh, this new movement of things.
Yeah. I the more that I've thought about this, and it seems to me that just maybe it's a process of getting older, maybe it's a process of reading, or maybe it's a process of talking to interesting people like you and learning and changing my ideas. The more I go back into history and I think to myself, like, what a load of bullshit. Like, how did we get here? And when I start thinking about that, I go, well, I guess on some level, if you want people to work together, you have to give them a story that they can all get behind. But it's that changing story that seems to have not just misguided us, but kind of hurt us a little bit.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you look back throughout history, it's usually those stories are derived from people who are in positions of authority
Yeah.
and who want to maintain and grow those positions of authority. The people versus the heads of state, the governments, the elites, whatever, the throne, wherever you go in history, it's pretty much the same story. It's, yeah, well, maybe for a generation where, it was a populist uprising and it was a person of the people for that group of people, it's all hunky dory. But once you fast forward a couple generations out of that, it's usually misery for a fair chunk of people. And
Yep.
when those people get upset about that, all of a sudden you have these divisive tactics that come into play. And, those divisive tactics are everything from, the stadium gladiatorial matches, much akin to our sports of today, to these movements that say us first them.
Yeah.
And that us versus them, if any of those people ever remove themselves from the emotional reaction standpoint and just had a reasonable conversation, a rational conversation with each other, they would always find that they agree on much more than they disagree upon. I mean, even when you take these people who say, yes, I'm left, yes, I'm right, by and large, if you get them in the same room and you're having a dinner party, most people are going to agree that, yeah, it's good for humans to have a good life, the pursuit of happiness, liberty, freedom. You don't, at the individual level, you're not going to get somebody being, no, I think we need more state authority. Nobody really ever says that,
Right.
except for the people who are in the positions of authority. Um, so yeah, it is massively damaging to society.
Yeah. And sometimes I when I see riots happening on TV, like you can see how that particular narrative can be spun in multiple directions, but the one thing it's accomplishing is continuing to move forward the existing power base. Like, let's say you see
Hmm.
a group of people rioting, you can market that to one group as, hey, you should be afraid of these people, look what they're doing to your stuff. And then you simultaneously market to the other group that's doing it like, yeah, you guys are standing up for things. But
Hmm.
both of those narratives do well for the existing power structure because both sides need them. It's the old divide and conquer, and that, what would you do without us? And, we need to take your money so we can fix this thing for you. But in
Right.
reality, the group that's rioting is on the same side as the people that think they're afraid. Now, maybe if someone burns down your business, they may not seem to be on your side, but they're rioting because everything has been stolen from them and they're pissed off and they don't know how to deal with it. And
Hmm.
the same group that's upset about it wants to riot too, but they just haven't done it yet. So there's got to be some sort of way to crack that narrative to bring people together. Have you ever thought about maybe some of those things, or what a path going forward that could unite people?
Well, I think one part of the problem is it's not just divide and conquer. It's divide, conquer, but don't look at me. Because I mean, just look at the past couple of years. We had the single
Yeah.
greatest transfer of wealth that this world has ever known. And it happened in some of the most turbulent times for the general populace, right? Um, those are the types of situations where it's like, hey, by the way, uh, these people are anti-vaxxers. You should hate them. And then, by the way, you guys should hate them because they're just sheep, a part of the system. Don't look at our billions and billions and billions of dollars in profits over here. Go off and hate each other. Because if we're not actually talking about the real problem, we're not, when it comes to like the riots or things like that, yeah, a real problem is the guy got his building burnt down, but that's a relative effect of a greater problem. And the relative media companies or respective media companies take those little bits of relative truths and magnify them into, these juxtaposed massive, points of contention with people. Uh, Again, and then that's just to miss the larger conversation, the root problem, which is the reality of the world that we live in is the socioeconomic divide is foundational to all of these problems. If they, and then you have the things like equality of outcome, which is crazy. That
Yeah.
would just further the socioeconomic divides. You have the people on like the WF saying, you own nothing and like it. And these are the wrong solutions to the problem. They're going to just further divide people and spawn more and more angst and hatred. If we actually talk about the problem, which is the inequalities in life, which is where all of these, these situations are stemmed from, the inequalities, we can actually solve those problems. But it requires a sacrifice from the people who traditionally don't like to sacrifice things.
Yeah.
And that sacrifice is, this insane pursuit for profits above all else. Is truly where the sacrifice comes in. And it's not to say that profits go away. Capitalism
Yeah.
is a great aspect, can be a great aspect of a society. It does have the ability to raise, people out of poverty. These TikTokers, for instance, like we were talking about. That's a great part of capitalism. Some kid who just has a phone in the backwoods middle of nowhere all of a sudden can extricate himself from a poor situation and empower his friends, family, and community and loved ones. That's awesome. That should never be discounted. But when, that same kid has to sign up to a conglomerate group of people to get promotion in order to get that viral thing and hack off 20% here, 10% for a manager, you know, another 30% for taxes at the end of the day, if they're lucky, if they did it right in a business mindset. All these other little things right here, problems arise. And not discussing those problems, let alone the baser problem, which is why should somebody who grows up 8 blocks away from somebody else have all the ability to go to a school that doesn't try to indoctrinate them, that teaches them how to reason through the world, teaches them applicable skills, and then provides them with a network of opportunity. But yet, just a few blocks away, you have zero of that. And in fact, you have opposite in many instances. Uh, those are problems. And when you don't tackle those problems, all the other problems are going to stay there. They're not going to go away. Doesn't matter what top-down solution you put on them, because the root problem is, you can cover up the crack in the foundation as much as you want. It's still a crack in the foundation.
Yeah, and there's really no incentive to pour a new foundation when,
You
the
can
people
cover
that are
up the
gonna.
crack.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting when you look at it from that particular angle. Like And like you said, I guess this is a situation. It's not new. It's the existing power structure that just recycles itself over and over and again. And in some ways, if we look at the consolidation of power and we look at the transfer of wealth and we look at it as a historical issue, I guess, the best predictor of future behavior is past relevant behavior. So, we could see what's happening here as just an attempt to destroy the last remaining avenues of wealth, like the food industry. Like you could argue the food industry is being disrupted right now and is in a hostile takeover. If we look at farmers and we look at GMOs that are all of a sudden it used to be they wanted to be labeled, and now it's like you can't even know about them. Right. Now it's like you're going to eat some bugs, and people are buying farmland, and people around the world are being pushed into an area where they have to either capitulate or not do it. On a side scale too, like if you look at what happened with gas prices, like, hey, we're going to run this thing up to $8 so that we can bring it down to $4 and you'll feel good about it, when it should be $1.85. It's just this, we're going to push it super far. Okay, we'll bring it back a little bit. And then you guys just fight about this other dumb stuff over here while we've already raised it up to, 50% more than we wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's replete through all industries, all commodities. And, the food one's an interesting one. You have Sri Lanka. The result of those food policies, those GMOs moving in, the removal of the ability to use certain fertilizers, led to basically, I think it was like 30-40% of the crop that they were normally used to. Now all of these farmers can't afford to pay their leases for their equipment, for the workers, for all this stuff. They have to give up their land on pennies on the dollar. Well, guess who's there to pick it up on pennies on the dollar? That's a problem. And they obviously recognized it as a problem because they went in and threw out the power structure. You have the same thing happening in Norway right now. These are old games being played again. We could go through history and we can find examples very similar to this where, the taxes or the stipends for the crown from the farmers was raised to such a point where the farmer becomes insolvent. And all of a sudden, well, guess who's there to pick up the property and take it over? The crown. So, it ebbs and flows, right? And I think we see these cycles. They're not true cycles, of course. It's kind of like a toilet bowl, I think.
Smaller and smaller circles.
Small and smaller circles. But we see these things replete throughout history. And then, with the right perspective, it's not hard to see them playing themselves out in the world of today.
Yeah, that's interesting. Speaking of the crown and land, I read an article. I should probably try to put a link to it. I'll try to do that in the show notes. But it talked about the farmers. Is it the Netherlands? Is that? And they were talking to this guy, and he says, while some of it is about food, another part is about our land. Like they want to take all of our land back so they can build housing there for these people or that group or whatever. And you're like, oh gosh, that makes so much more sense. What better way to seize the land and build stuff the same way maybe the Chinese model goes in and says, we're going to put this here because this is the best spot for it. Well, you can't do it because the farmers own it. Well, we'll just say they can't use fertilizer. Now they can't farm it. And since they have a lease, they can't pay. So we'll just take it back. It's interesting. And then if you factor in Sri Lanka or even Ghana for that matter, I think Ghana a few years ago was energy independent. And they said, oh, you got to put these ESG scores in. And so they're like, okay. And now they're completely destitute, and if you were to look at it from that perspective, if I were to put my tinfoil hat on, or maybe just my thinking cap on, whichever one you want to call it, you could say, wow, there sure are a lot of these third world countries that are industrializing. They're not going to need our help. They're going to be independent. And that means our profit's going to be down. That means our power that the world's going to be down. Maybe we should force them to implement these, procedures that are going to ruin themselves. And that will allow us to take it back over. I mean, I don't think that's too far-fetched to think about.
Well, no, and I think there's plenty of evidence that suggests that that's exactly what's happening in some instances. There's other evidence. Like when I was traveling down in Central and South America, I spent a lot of time in Costa Rica. When I was first in Costa Rica, um, you know, lovely populace. Everybody was fit because it was the middle of the jungle and you couldn't get anywhere besides walking through the jungle. Uh, as I was there for quite a few years, the first thing I saw was that the police force got all new cars and a helicopter donated to it. And then all of a sudden, there was a new stadium being built that was donated, a new bridge that was being built that was donated. Oh, who's building it? Chinese slave labor. Who donated it? The Chinese. After all this stuff's built, after all the goodwill is instituted, then comes the payment. We want access to your fishing waters. Not only that, but every single grocery store, hardware store, convenience store in these countries turned into Chinese owned. Why? Because they get cheaper goods, and now they just signed a free trade agreement with Costa Rica, and they already have the connections in China to ship in all of this highly produced garbage, and they can offer it at a cheaper price than any of the locals could. So they just ran rampant through all these countries. This was up and down the Pacific coast, and I was traveling from 2007 to 2014, 2013ish, and I saw this happen in multiple countries. And so there's different games that get played too, but all of these games are just insidious mechanisms to gain more power, more leverage, more control. And then, when instead of having to donate, next time you just ask
Hmm.
because nobody wants, because now there's all sorts of kickbacks in play, right? And
Right.
so now you just ask. And then if somebody says no, well, there's somebody else that's going to say yes because of all the kickbacks that are in play. And so the next person comes in. And we've seen this from that kind of level. We've seen it with regime changes instituted by countries. We've seen it, up and down the scale of society. Uh, and again, these are old games. There's nothing new in this handbook. It's an old handbook, and it's an effective handbook. How to raise an authoritarian regime seems to work pretty consistently throughout the years of humanity. Now, that's an interesting conversation as why that may be, but it definitely seems to be.
Yeah, it's like you're knocking on the wall and be like, you know what? I have built this beautiful giant horse statue I'd like to put in the center of your community. There's nothing inside of there, so don't look.
Don't
But
worry about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna put it right in the center right there. You guys just crash out, no problem.
And to that point, all of those, like in downtown San Jose, all of a sudden, one of the districts turned into a Chinatown. No,
Yeah,
I'm, nothing against that or anything like
right.
that. I mean, people are going to play the hands that they're dealt, and it is what it is. But that is what is happening. And to turn a blind eye to things like that, to all of these different things, well, now you're just resolving yourself to read the 240 character Twitter headlines, and that's how you're going to make your decision.
I feel like the Chinese were looking at the Jewish diaspora and been like, "You guys almost got this right, but not quite." That's pretty cute. Hang on, let me show you
Yeah,
how this
hold on,
really works out.
hold on, hold my beer. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, see this book right here. This book is from like before 3000 BC or whatever. Like you guys kind of got the diaspora, but we're gonna show you how to do it the right way. It's yeah. I think it was President Z or something. It's like black cat, white cat. They all catch mice. And I remember
Hmm.
the first time hearing that and just having to sit down and be like, okay, what is he? Is he talking about our system? He's talking about capitalism versus communism. Like, but it was everything. He's like,
It's everything.
basically, yeah, it's everything. Like, it doesn't matter
Hmm.
which system you use, even
Right.
though, yeah, please.
Because they're all corrupt. They're all corruptible. Whether you're playing the black cat or the white cat, you just play both of them, and as long as you're playing a longer game, when that game ends, you win. And to China's credit, they definitely play the long game probably better than any nation state um, has to date, as far as I'm concerned. Um, Now, that's dangerous. Of course, we know how where that leads and what that leads to. And the crazy thing is, the only thing I think that really stops it is actually conversation,
Yeah.
is the open sharing of ideas. Because if everybody's locked into their headlines and their TikTok scrolling and all these things, well, they're not going to be aware that the world is changing rapidly around them, even though it's pretty apparent that it is. People are just content to continue on because they're not getting any more information. They're not hearing those different words. And the words that are being chosen are definitely being chosen with purpose, with intent, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. There is a lot of words being chosen. There is a lot of ideas changing right in front of you, but if you're so locked into your screen, or you're so locked into a cultural
Hmm.
fight that challenges you on an emotional level, you're not seeing the big picture. You're not seeing the fact that the person around you, just because they wear a different color, is still part of you, or still part of a system you care about, or a system of ideas, or a future that you believed in.
Or a great
And
conversation you could have, a
yeah,
relationship, a friendship. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
you know, and you could talk to most people who've lived a good bit of life, actually lived a good bit of life, and they have friends from every walk.
yeah,
They have the one guy who their wife hates for them to go meet up with that guy because he's just an animal. And no matter what, how good her husband is, that guy is an animal. But everybody in the family loves him. He's Uncle Ted, right?
yeah,
But when your husband goes hangs out with him alone, oh shit.
yep,
you know,
yeah.
but yet that's still a valuable relationship for everybody involved. So long as it doesn't go completely off the rails, which does happen, of course. But having those relationships from all walks of life, I mean, that's an enrichment of life. I mean, those are experiences. A guy who served 20 years in the Navy, you didn't serve 20 years in the Navy, you have no idea what that's like, but he can tell you,
Yep.
and you can have a perspective of it, and you can have an appreciation of it. And now when you meet somebody else who spent 20 years in the Navy, who might have a different opinion of you, you have a common bond between. You're like, oh yeah, I know this guy who, he was a submariner. Oh yeah, I would never do that, those submarine guys are crazy. And now all of a sudden you have a conversation, and that conversation can go nowhere, can blossom into beautiful relationships and friendships. And without those connections, without that ability to do that, we're cogs in a rail.
Yeah, and some of the best conversations you can have are with people you disagree with, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
the best way, I mean, it's pretty rewarding when you can talk to someone and come away with a different perspective that you can use. And I don't think you can do that if you're set to if you have a narrow mind and you already have decided that I can't talk to this person because they like this other person. I spoke with a guy yesterday that I'm hoping to get on my podcast, but he called me and is like, "Hey, I noticed that you talked to this other person, so I'm gonna have to ask you some questions before we talk." And I was thinking to myself, like, "We're gonna come on, man!" Like, I'm excited to talk to him because I can't wait to hear what he has to say, and like that might be an awesome, challenging conversation, and it's an opportunity for me to say, "Look, maybe I spoke to this person you don't agree with, but does that mean I'm a bad person, or are you at a point in your life where you can't talk to somebody because they talk to somebody you don't agree with, and if so, why? Why would you feel that way? Is there
Right.
something that happened to you, or I mean, why do you think that? Like, that's an
Well,
opportunity for awesomeness."
it is an opportunity for awesomeness, but most people, they don't want to be challenged.
Yeah.
Because with the propensity for challenge comes the opportunity for defeat.
Wow. Can you say that again? That was beautiful.
With the propensity for challenge comes the opportunity for defeat.
That's so true. And
And
yeah.
well, and with that, especially on like a public forum or something like that, it's one
Mm,
thing if you're in a bar, but when you're in a public forum, all of a sudden, that can carry all sorts of connotations depending on what sort of group of associations one has. If you're supposed to be a righteous hero for some cause, and you get blown out of the water by somebody who's pragmatic and logical, what does that say about your cause? What does that say about your position to, be in that role? People stand to potentially lose a lot of not just social credit, but, economic capital, resources, relationships, all sorts of things, just because of how ingrained we are into this tribalism, you know, us versus them type idea.
Yeah, what happens if you have built an identity for yourself and then all of a sudden you talk to someone who may or may not be significant in your life and they push down your identity? Like that means you have to go back and start thinking about all these other things that maybe you ruined that relationship with someone you loved because of this idea. But now you have to revisit that and maybe
Right.
apologize or
Oh yeah. And back to the book, no absolutes. It's,
yeah.
that's another one of those liberating and freeing premises, is that, you're not tying yourself into these ideas intentionally. And you're trying to look at them all from as great of perspective as you can. And you're trying to be aware of all of these angles and, you know, getting locked into something like that. And when you do that, all of a sudden, those evaluations don't become problematic. They become a way to navigate.
Yeah, I want to read. Do I have it right here somewhere? Oh yeah, I wanted to read a paragraph in this particular subject for everybody watching. This what the book looks like. It's it's really freeing. It's like a little manual to to pull open and just navigate. It's like a map in a way. Like that's how I've used it. Like I'm a huge fan of maps. And I think that everything can be a map, a mental map, a neural
Mhm.
map, a network, and when you can find a set of it's like a key to a map. Okay, well this means this, and you can set
The
that up to think about.
legend.
Yeah, like a legend. And
Hmm.
I'm speaking to Mr. Wizard, the legend right now. The
Oh,
legend that
geez.
wrote the book. Okay, so this is the part what we began talking about today, and it's called Choose Your Words Wisely. I want to read this opening paragraph right here and get your thoughts on it. Our words define our reality. They shape the lens that we view the world through, and consequently, the lens that the world views us through. This interplay creates physical changes in the mind, some quickly and some over longer periods of time, similar to the way we form routines and at the extremes, addictions. Our words form the perspective in which we view the world because that is how we are constantly defining it to ourselves. It is the foundation, and all our possible experiences, emotions, assumptions, interactions, and they are built on this foundation. If we start at the beginning and we say that our words define our reality, they shape the lens that we view the world through, and consequently, the lens that the world views us through. What do you mean when you say the lens that the world views us through?
Well, if I was to go on Twitter every day and proclaim that, ants were going to take over the world, and that's what I said on a daily basis, everybody'd be like, "Oh, that's the crazy guy who thinks ants are going to take over the world." That's not who
Yeah.
I am at any stretch of the imagination, but that's the way I'm perceived because those are the words that I'm putting out to be received. Uh, so that's that lens that, it's a two-way mirror essentially. It reflects back to you whatever you put out to it.
Yeah,
But it,
that's
yeah,
beautiful. What are you going to say something else right there? I cut you
no,
off.
no, no.
Right.
I had a
Yeah,
stream of consciousness, but
yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I often when I read that, I started thinking to myself too, like, we are if we look at ourselves as not coming into this world but coming out of it, then maybe we're a lens in which the greater power sees the world through, and that would mean that everybody around us is a lens. Like, like you said, when you say something to people, they reflect it back to you, but it's the way they seeing. Like if you look at it, this is the way people see me, then that makes sense. And we have lenses in our eyes, so why wouldn't everybody be a lens like that?
and another interesting point in that is that not all reflections are created equal, right? Depending
No, what?
on that not all reflections are created equal. So depending on the orientation and nature of that person that's reflecting that back, it could be a distorted
Oh
perception.
yeah, yeah,
So there's just like everything else, as above, so below, and the multitudes of layers to these things are seemingly infinite. and can be applied in conceptual form to most aspects of everyday life. Uh, so yeah, and to your point, lenses in the eyes. We use lenses to to view the universe. The idea of a lens is something that most people never even think about because they're so ubiquitous in society and as part of the human experience. But at the end of the day, it's a very interesting piece of technology, whether you call it a biological piece of technology or manufactured lens, because depending on how the lens is shaped, is going to determine the nature of that reflection of the image that's being perceived. And just like most everything else in the human experience, are you familiar with hormesis?
Um, it sounds familiar, but please, I don't. It doesn't sound. I don't think I can tell you what it is.
So hormesis, the idea is that through exposure you gain a greater you grow. So like for instance, when a kid eats a mud pie as an infant, that's actually good for them, even though yeah, it's a bunch of bacteria, it's all this stuff, but the exposure to that allows their immune system to grow. Kind of same idea behind like resistance training.
Mm,
I'm tearing down the muscles and and then allowing them to grow by providing the proper environment for
okay.
that. So that idea of you know seemingly applies to just about everything when you're talking about growing a situation. And tying it all the way back to our first conversation about, you asked me, uh is it necessary for society to go through these types of struggles in order to grow? The idea of hormesis suggests that yes, we need these confrontations, these adversities, these resistances, these debates, and you could take it to a violent extreme or you can take it to a civil extreme. But I think we need all of that in order to grow these different pathways, whether it be an internal pathway or, a societal pathway or a communal pathway or what have you.
Yeah, that brings up 2 points to mind. First off, you know, if we do see ourselves through the world sees us through different lenses, and you look at it like a set of funhouse mirrors and you get a distorted view. Sometimes you maybe get a distorted view of the way people see you, or maybe your view is distorted. But so you sometimes you see yourself as like this short mirror where you're all fat and stubby, and the time you see yourself all sucked in and skinny. You know,
Body dysmorphia, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And you know what? Like, it would be silly to say, I hate that mirror. I hate the way that mirror shows me, But in a way, it's a gift because you get to see yourself in a way you never have before. The same way you get to see yourself in someone else's opinion of you, regardless if you like it or not. Like, it's kind of a
Mhm.
gift because you get to see a side of you that you can't see yourself.
Well, and
And
and it helps you grow. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, what if that view is partial? Like it's an image of you,
it is.
right?
Right. And if you don't like it, what are you going to do about it? Right. I mean, you're going to change it. If you truly don't like it, you're going to go out of your way to be like, well, I don't want to be perceived as that guy.
Yeah. Or like maybe you do like it. Maybe you're like, wow, I look really good that way. I should try to see
Right.
myself that way more often.
Right. Yeah. The opposite effect is ever present as well.
What do you mean by that? Say that I like that.
The opposite effect is ever present as well.
Yeah, what is that? Can you break that down for me?
So just like you said, if I'm seeing myself in a good light and I get that reflection back, like somebody says, "Man, you're just rocking it today. It is really awesome." You go, "Wow, I like that way that feels." So I'm going to go off and I'm going to spend more of my time and invest more of my time to get that feeling back. And that so the ever presence is that while you could take the negative from it, there's also the positives that are there from it as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the more that I think about that, like if I hope people are taking a lot away from this. And if you're with us this far in the conversation, take just a few more minutes to think about that, because there's some real growth that comes from there. And you can see that as a gift when you are shown an image of you that you may not be familiar with. don't automatically think it's bad. Don't automatically fall into the emotional trap of wanting to say something that comes to your mind. Just mow it over for a minute and think,
Mhm.
hey, is there something good in there? Hey, I like the way my eyes look, or I like the way that sounded, or hey, that's funny. What's funny about it? And try to find your own truth in the non-truth of the other, if that kind of makes sense. I think you can
And
really
even
learn.
even if if it's still negative, take the positive twist on it. Is, well, what do I have to do to not be perceived that way again, or
Mm,
not be seen that way, or not show myself that way? And this kind of ties back to words are important.
yeah.
And choosing those words wisely will greatly alter the perception of you in the wider world, in your social groups, and in your community, um, online.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe not, it doesn't even, it can be the words. I think, let me try to say it like this. Sometimes people say things to me and I automatically react to them, but I have a choice of interpreting their words. And maybe that's a way of using my words wisely, is that I don't have to take their words, but I can interpret their words in a different way. Maybe that's a different way to, maybe that's what one of the ways you mean by using your words wisely.
Absolutely, it's not just what comes out of your mouth; it's what you think to yourself.
Mm,
And probably more so what you think to yourself, because what comes out of your mouth is much going to be a reflection to that, unless you're live on the internet just going off the cuff.
yeah.
Which is an interesting format, and I appreciate that you wanted to do it live, because yeah, you can sit there and edit anything for days and make yourself look like a wizard. But if you can actually perform it, then everybody everybody loves a great magic show. Everybody loves the comedian. Everybody loves that that sense of potential failure, and
Yeah.
then utter success because it was pulled off. That's in that's something to admire in somebody, really. I think, is if you can have a real conversation, be authentic to your audience, what you're trying to the point you're trying to get across to yourself. uh you know that's going to change the nature of all conversations that you have, for one. But it's also going to make everybody around you better for it as well. Those things kind of have a a real trickle down effect.
Yeah, I agree. I was speaking to another podcaster a while back, and he had mentioned that when he talks to people, he has found a better format in his view is that you reach out to the person you want to talk to, and you say, look, here's how I do it. I offer this particular recorded so that if there's anything that you said that you don't like, we can take it down. And like, I admire that 100%, but we're
Mhm.
opposed in that I, I have enough confidence in the conversation that, but let's just say what we mean. And if somebody says something they don't mean, I think that that can be easily cleared up, especially
Right.
if you're not like trying to be like a get you person. Well, I'm going to clip this and make it this way. Like I have no interest in doing that. And I think real conversations allow for people to make mistakes, but then
Mhm.
fix those mistakes in the same conversation.
Right. And I think if you're being authentic, people recognize a real
Yeah.
conversation.
Right.
And yeah, the idea that most people don't want to do it live, or, well, not most, but a good chunk of those people are coming from the perspective of, I'm trying to sell something. I have a
Yeah.
narrative, I have a piece of propaganda, I have talking points, the list, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and they and straying anywhere off of that list is dangerous waters for those people, because that's not their authenticity. That's not who they are. And
Yeah.
if you're just using talking points, eventually talking points expire, especially in a live conversation. And then what do you have left?
The emptiest barrel makes the loudest sound.
I like that one.
Yeah, right. That's so true. All right, let me read one. How you doing on time? Are you okay on time?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So this interplay creates physical changes in the mind, some quickly and some over longer periods. I think we were just kind of getting into that one right there.
Hmm.
But when you say that, the interplay creates physical changes, some over longer periods of time, similar to the way we form routines and at the extremes addictions. Do you think that, like, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So, yeah, how do you think that your words can create extreme addictions? Like, how do those two, which web are those connected by?
So, it's the it's the ability to justify something. Because a lot of people who've had addiction problems that I've spoken to, there's always a self-talk. It's,
Yeah.
oh, I can do this today because it's a reward, or I'm going to quit tomorrow, or oh, it's just too stressful. Just one more drink today. I just need that today, or on and on and on. And so we talk ourselves into these addictions. Our body is just it's trying to facilitate what we're telling it to do. So as we talk ourselves and feed ourselves, our body's just going to respond and be like, okay, I guess this is what we're supposed to do. This is, the guy pulling all the strings here is putting this in our mouth, and here we go. So, your body doesn't, yes, it has an addictive response to these things over time because of the way neural pathways develop, because of the types of neurochemicals that are secreted when you go through these types of processes. And then the reinforcement behavior is, that self talk, those actions that you take, the one more days, the things like that. And so, these words eventually can lead us to that type of extreme, and they can also lead to other types of extremes. I'm sure you've known the person who's the eternal optimist.
Yeah.
A bird drops dead next to him, and they're like, they find something good in it, and it's like, well, gosh, that that's just a different type of self-talk addiction, right? That's probably more due to wanting to avoid certain types of emotions and responses and things like that. And so you can put yourself on extremes with your internal speak. It also combines with your actions, but what you're talking to yourself is going to, like you said, it's going to lead to those actions.
Yeah, I think it's something that if people take time to think about it, it's an experiment you can do with yourself that will lead to incredibly interesting outcomes. Like I've often, I think it was Viktor Frankl who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and
Mm.
in that book, he's a Jewish fellow who goes to this concentration camp, and after making it out of the concentration camp, he asked the question, why did some people survive and why did some people die? And
Right.
that became the title of the book, Man's Search for Meaning. And
Mm.
some of the parallels that you can take away from that are, when you find yourself in an extreme situation, for some of us who have had, all of us have seen death, and if you haven't, it's coming your way. You're going to have to deal with it. So you have a choice of, some people see death in their family and it ruins their relationships with the people close to them. Other
Mm.
people see death in the family and it brings the relationship closer than it's ever been before. And it's a matter of perspective. And it seems to me to be a matter of inner dialogue of,
Mhm.
how are you integrating this? What is the story you're telling yourself about why these things happened? And if you can control that, I
Do I
guess that,
want, yeah, do
yeah,
I want to experience this pain again? No, I don't. Avoid it at all costs. Versus, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry I didn't have all the time and said the things I wanted to say and spend the moments together that I wanted. I'm going to go do that with these people. And that's the internal conversation for those two, right? Either you can't deal with it emotionally and you need to avoid it, or you realize that, oh, these people around me, that's what this is about. I need to be closer. I need to spend more time with them.
that reminds me of the yin and yang symbol, like the two Paisleys with the dot in the other.
Mhm.
Exactly what you said about these two forces. I don't want to deal with the pain, or I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again. And it's just, there's that little dot in there and it's just moving. And like, I always think of that particular symbol when I think of internal struggle. And it's both beautiful and dangerous and scary, but yeah, I now that you put it like that, I could understand how that words can form an internal addiction, a cycle inside you that is repeating, be it for good or be it for bad. That's I'm glad you brought that up, because I now have a mental map, or at least ascribed an image to it, or a
Right.
symbol that helps me think about it like that. It's
Well, and then the
fascinating
other,
how that happens.
it is fascinating how that works. And the other aspect to that symbol is balance, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, and that's kind of the core of the book. At the end of the
Yep.
day, is seeking balance for in the light of all of these things. And that balance is, yes, you don't want to experience that again, but and yes, you do want to spend time with these people, but the balance is realizing that you need to live a full life yourself. If you go off to the extreme and be like, and dedicate yourself to, I'm just going to spend all my time with my family, I'm going to remove myself from my social spheres and all of these things, you know you're going to end up in a detrimental situation, just as you end up in a detrimental situation avoiding that trauma, avoiding those emotions, and pushing those people away. It's finding the balance of those things, looking at the perspectives, being aware of those multiple perspectives internal to yourself, that really allow you to then move forward in life and
Yeah.
not be
Okay.
stuck in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna try to put up this image that we have in your book, because I think we have maybe brought this image up before, but I think what you just described is a very good linguistic pathway to an image that that you have in the book, and that's the cube with the
Hmm.
triangle with the fulcrum point in the middle. And I think I have it right here, but I really believe that is a let's see if I can. There we go.
There it was. Yeah.
Right there. So this line right here represents the balance. And it, like I probably told you this before, but the dang imagery you have in here is so awesome for mental maps, and so awesome for seeing that.
I'm happy to
And
hear that.
yeah, good. And for people listening, let me try to describe what I see in front of me. Is a three-dimensional cube. On each corner represents a linguistic representation of how to think. But in the middle, there's a triangle. In the middle of the cube, there's a triangle with a line on top of it representing balance. And we were just speaking about symbols, about the yin and the yang. And before that, we were talking about the language we use in our inner dialogue to help us navigate the world. And this is a beautiful representation of that. And I think they go well together. So I wanted to bring that up and show people right there.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. So let me move on to the next sentence I had that I have outlined here. Our words form the perspective in which we view the world, because that is how we are constantly defining it to ourselves. It is the foundation and all our possible experiences. So perspective, I think, is a semi large word that is easily misinterpreted, because my perspective may not be your perspective. I think we've covered that a little bit in the
Right.
conversation, but can you dissect perspective a little bit more for us?
Well, sure. In that context, the idea is uh, the only way we interpret the world is through words. When we were very young, it was sights and sounds and colors and sensations. But as we get older, it's all words. And even if you look at something, you think, and it's a red square, you're still thinking red square.
Yeah.
And so those words that we use are going to be our perspective on how we view things. Perspective is, you know, the way I like to think about it is, if you have an image and you can see straight onto that image, or you can take a little bit of a turn around the image and you can see a little bit on the side, or you can go all the way around to the back and you can see it from the back. And being able to have a full perspective of a situation or an image allows us to then understand it.
Yeah.
And with understanding, then then we have a choice on how we want to how we want to act, on how we want to emotionally respond, on how we want to identify this information, the situation. You know, situational awareness is something that's talked about with, you know, in military and things like that a lot. But situational awareness is something that anybody can develop, and should develop, in my opinion. And you know, it's not just seeing the situation as it's unfolding, but you know, in this instance, seeing it from hopefully a 360-degree perspective, or as close to that as you can get. Being able to walk around your problem and look at it from the back as opposed to tackling it head on. You know, there's a lot of wordplay that you can use to create the imagery to identify the idea of perspective. But I like, you know, the idea that you can view something from a 360-degree viewpoint by being able to put yourself in a different state of mind via the words that we use to see that.
Yeah, that was awesome. Really well done. I the one I use, like, people who are watching can see this cube, and I've described it to people that are listening. But think about every idea that you come in contact with as a potential used car you're going to buy. You want to walk around it, you want to kick the tires, you want to take it for a little test drive. You might
Mm.
want to sit in the passenger seat or the back seat, you know, or if it's convertible, let's see if the top works. Let's check
Mm.
out the radio, you know, and and it can be as detailed the or as not detailed as you want it. But if you can learn to see your situation, for me as an old car, and you can do it rapidly. You can look at this conversation as a 360-degree object, as a different perspective of yours. But the more angles you can see it from, the better you can become educated about it. And the better you can become educated about it, the more useful it is to you. And the more useful it is to you, the more useful it is to other people. And the more useful it is to you and other people, the better your relationship with those other people is going to be. So every idea out there is a perspective or a potential vehicle for a better life. And I think if you can see it like that, and like that's it, again,
I
that's
like that. I like that.
well, that's what, thank you, because that's what I got from the book when I read it.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, another way I'd like to paint that one is, you know, by being able to have that perspective, that's how we gain knowledge.
Yeah.
And then by accumulating that knowledge and you know, thinking about it and applying it, you know, that's how we gain understanding. And
Mm.
then, you know, and then through that understanding is how we gain the wisdom to you know, to use that in the everyday life, or to apply it to our lives. If it's not every day, you know, maybe it's just a moment. But uh, that process of, you know, being able to see something, understand it, be knowledgeable about it, and then be wise about it is not something that's really taught as far as I'm aware of.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't taught to me. It was something that, you know, I had to learn through some painful experiences sometimes. You know, it reminds me of there's an old set of linguistic representations that go something like, if the soup was as warm as the fish, and the fish as young as the maiden, and the you know, then the
Hmm.
dinner would have been beautiful, you know. But like,
Hmm.
I gotta rethink that, because it's pretty funny if I could say it the right way. But the
I
the
go ahead, go ahead. I can't remember it.
yeah, well, next show I'll
All
look it
right.
up and do it. But yeah, it's perspective can be everything, and it's amazing to me how in times of crisis you get to gain perspective. Like, there's been a lot of times in my life, and I guarantee you've probably found this, where I've found myself alone, scared, angry, and just in my own little box. And all it took was for me to change a few words in a sentence to free myself from that place of scared fear, where, you know, if you just change a few words, you can change the entire perspective, and you can change your reality, and it can be your reality. And sometimes they're just perspective is a way of liberating ourselves, but also a way of confining ourselves to failure. It's interesting
Hmm.
how it can be both of those things.
Hmm. Very interesting. And uh, going back to our psychedelic
Yeah.
bits of conversation,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of the therapeutical benefits that people experience on these psychedelic uh, trips or situations, experiences, uh, you know, it's all facilitated through this perspective of self-talk. And usually for a lot of people, it's, yeah, I thought about it that way in my head, but then when I was having that experience, the way I thought about it was just a little bit different. And I realized that Sally really didn't mean to be so mean to me because, you took just one little step back.
Yep.
And so, there's tools that we can use beyond, just trying to program ourselves linguistically that allow us to tap into this at a bit more of a fundamental level, uh, which I find fascinating. Um, the idea that we can not only have this massive complex system of things, but we can also be aided by something random in nature that kind of threads all of this together and paints that perspective in just a little bit of a different light that allows us to open ourselves up, remove traumas, get over addictions, things like that. That's wildly fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Sally wasn't trying to be mean to me, but she sure is pretty.
Oh, so that's why I thought she was mean, is because
Yeah.
she's pretty and she didn't like me. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Every single man has fallen into that trap,
Every
right?
single man knows a
Every one
Sally.
of us. Yeah, every one of us. Yeah. And it's amazing how, for me, I had this recent I took about 5 grams over the weekend. And for me, I've become familiar with this place, and or at least better understood that, for me anyways, towards the 3 hour mark, I find myself in a cognitive area where I can try on different ideas, like a new shirt. I
Hmm.
can try on
Without
different
implication.
perspectives without
Right.
implication. And I can
Hmm.
and I can live that perspective, or I
Hmm.
can live that for a year or a month or 10 years or 50 years, and I can play it out. And it's
Hmm.
fascinating to try on these ideas that I would never, some of them like are probably pretty dangerous. Like I probably should never do that, but right now I can live it out in a
Hmm.
simulated reality and see what it would do. And it, it makes me think about, you know, different type of mythologies or different types of folklore about entering the spirit realm and being taken over by a spirit, because ideas are almost like spiritual beings, in that if you have this spirit inhabit you, you can move forward with this idea. And if ideas are powerful, ideas can be something that are intoxicating, not only to you but to people around you. If you look at people that are phenomenal communicators and they can speak to you in a way that makes you feel beautiful, or if you look at any type of cults, they're able to hit you with what they call the love bomb and they make you feel a
Hmm.
certain way. But in the height of the psychedelic trip, I think that you are given tools that you can use to hammer out not only your perspective, but build frameworks for other people. And that can be dangerous if you use that in a way to trap people. If you use that in a way to, instead of liberate people, you push them into a corridor that is, where that's going. And it gets back to what we were talking about, the farmers or
Yep.
governments or authoritarian rule. Like there are ways to build frameworks for mass amounts of people that benefit only a small group of people. And a lot of people are caught up doing that. But I think I may have went off on a tangent there, but
Well, no, I think, that's, you tied it back perfectly. I think everywhere we look, people are doing that.
yeah,
That's even if you look at corporate structure, it's the same
yeah,
idea.
yep,
Um, you know, Now you do have things like decentralized cryptocurrencies and some of these things that are kind of turn that on its head. But they have their own problems and are a part of the larger system as a whole, which creates an inherent problem, potentially an existential problem for every single one of these ideas. Because now, if it ever gets to the point where it could uproot the system and decentralize that power, it'll probably disappear pretty fast or be regulated out of existence. Just kind of how these farmers, all of their ways and means are being regulated out of existence. Whenever it becomes a contention point for who gets the bottom line, you have to expect that the person in power is going to try everything at their disposal to remain in power.
Would you say, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was done.
Do you see these structures, be it a corporate governance, a national governance, or any type of power structure, is it fair to say that these are the absolutes and that alternatives would be the no absolute thinking? So in your book, the power structure would be absolute, these are the truths, versus non-absolutes, which the things we've been talking about here, whether it's choosing your words wisely or not prejudging, or truth is relative or reflection. These all represent pathways off the absolutist pathway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Yes, they do. And yes, they are. And I guess it gets down to the question, which is, should people be governed?
Beautiful.
And my stance on that is I don't feel that people need to be governed. Now, people need to have communication and a relationship, and there needs to be conversations and debates and things like that. But people being governed is inherently corruptive. And I don't think that there's ever been a single instance that anybody could cite throughout all of recorded history that would indicate anything else.
Okay, I agree with you 100%, but for the sake of conversation, let me push back on this a little bit.
Okay.
Let's say that there's a group of really uneducated people, and that if we don't help them, that they are going to be taken advantage of. So out of the greater good, it's our responsibility to help out the people that don't. Like, there's all these homeless people where I live. Like, if we don't build shelters for them and help them, then and by that, I think that's a form of governance. Like, we are helping them do things because they can't govern their own life, then we have to govern them. Like, if we don't do that, who's going to do it for them? And aren't they better off because we do that for them?
So I would push back on that and say that, that's focusing on putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, yes, you could build the housing, but the next generation of homeless people are going to be homeless. And then you're having to build more housing and more housing and more housing. You're not solving the problem of homelessness. The problem of homelessness is derived from many factors, but again, most of those are socioeconomic. If you didn't have the opportunity to be a child, for instance, to have a decent childhood, to have a decent education, or to at least be taught how to reason through life, you're subjected to the localized environment in which you can walk or drive throughout. Your ability to get beyond that is going to be heavily limited, because your ability to get a job, to make resources, to move beyond that situation is already shot in the foot, because you don't have all of these abilities and skills that someone else in a different socioeconomic position had. And that's the crux of that issue. And now, that leads to all sorts of different things. A lot of those places have problems with drugs, with all sorts of other stuff that, yeah, you can look at those on the surface and be like, oh, we can just take away the drugs and that'll solve the problem. No, it won't. We've seen that plenty of times. There's been plenty of cities who've tried all sorts of different things. Now, don't get me wrong, you can improve the situation, and to the end of your statement, yes, that would be an improvement for their lives, but you're not solving the problem. So then the question becomes, are we trying to solve problems, or are we just trying to take care of people and, placate them and, continue on down the same pathway? There's something to be said about both of those options, of course, but I think that if you actually solve the problems, then all of a sudden the next generation of people who should be homeless are not homeless. Those people are part of society. Those people are, generating jobs. They're creating ideas. They're building, the next generation of the iPhone. They're doing all of these things because they had the opportunity to. So those resources that would be divested to, putting a band-aid on the bullet wound, if they were, or if there was more resources to actually fix the problem at a core level. Now, fast forward a generation, yeah, the people who started that movement probably aren't going to see the fruits of their labor, but we stand on the shoulders of giants. We always have. Do you want to be one of those giants, or, do we want to make the whole thing crumble on a house of cards? I would like to be a giant personally, but
Yeah, I agree. I wonder, what do you think about this? It seems to me that a lot of the rhetoric I hear from a lot of people, and there's rhetoric on both sides, but in this particular argument, it seems to me that people who are running big corporations, a lot of multinational corporations, and even some people that run their own business, they're constantly talking about the problems with government regulation and how they're not allowed to go and do things. And if they could do these things, it would be much better. But that seems to be the same argument the employee has with his boss. Like, this guy's trying to micromanage me. And like, if he just let me do my job, I could do much better. If indeed multinational corporations or businesses were able to get government out of the way, wouldn't they just become the de facto governors in
absolutely.
the
Oh
same
yeah,
thing would happen, right?
it turns into a technocracy, which we're kind of seeing. I
Right.
mean, you got Apple with $1 trillion, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're on par with, I think, the top 30 nation states in the world as a single entity, as a business that's top down, run with an iron fist. So
Yep.
yeah, you actually end up in a worse situation, because now, especially if those companies lack any sort of unionization,
Yep.
now you end up in a situation that's entirely authoritarian. Uh, to the regulation part of things, I'm a firm advocate of free market. Uh, Now, free market should have some small regulations, is the same regulations that kind of, I think, should be involved with, say, you and I or anyone else, which is,
Yeah.
you, you could do whatever you're going to do, but if it starts to harm other people, there needs to be a conversation. There needs to be a stopping point. There needs to be some way to release valve on the situation. Uh, in those types of things, like, so, you'll hear like people from like a libertarian standpoint, like, oh, just free market, free
Yeah.
reign. Well, yeah, but then you have lakes that are so toxic that if you get 5 feet from it, you're going
Yeah.
to asphyxiate and die. um, so, there is a give and a take, and that give and a take, it's the same line as it is between people. It's, yeah, you can go off and be a loon in your basement and dance around and, wave your guns around, whatever you want to do, but you can't go out and do that on the street and potentially hurt somebody, uh, because, now other people's lives are involved, and there should be a responsibility there. uh, we don't have any personal responsibility, let alone radical personal responsibility in society anymore. It's always an appeal to authority. Somebody, especially these days, somebody attacks you in school, go talk to the principal. You have a problem, you call the cops. I'm not going to solve it myself. I'm going to let the court solve it. I'm going to sue you. Every single bit of our society is an appeal to authority. We don't solve our own problems. I mostly probably because people don't have the skills to. But then
Yeah.
on the other side of that is, those skills were bred out of us essentially,
Yeah.
from a large perspective. But then on top of that, you're not allowed to solve your own problems in many instances. It has to be reported. It has to do these things. Otherwise, you yourself then stand in transgression of the system.
Wow, that's a great point. I never thought about it like that. But yeah, it's it's like one giant chart of logical fallacies that like the people have decided, okay, only these Supreme Court people can tell you what a logical fallacy is. Well, actually, I have a note right over here on my wall that explains them all. Like, if people just took the time to treat each other not as the ideas that they think they are, but as the individual that they actually are, I think you could, and that was taught in school. If we could bring back some of that stuff, maybe part of it does come back to, or a large part of it comes back to education
Well,
and
it's a large part education. It's also, community, right?
yeah, that's a
Uh,
great point.
who goes over and knocks on their neighbor's door and asks for a cup of sugar?
Maybe
Even though
I
that's
do.
yeah, well, that's nice. But how many people?
Yeah,
Even though it's kind of an old trope, right?
yeah,
How many relationships do you have in your neighborhood? You're
yeah.
a magnanimous guy. I imagine you
Thank
have
you.
quite a few, but by and large, most people don't even talk to their neighbors. In fact, people put up privacy fences and put trees in the way of their
Yep.
neighbors and all these other things because they don't want anybody to look at them. They
Yeah.
don't want to even. And meanwhile, you know, it's a wild erosion of community just rampant through Western society, and you can attach it to quite a few things, but at the end of the day, that is as what happened. And when you have that erosion of community, there used to be the old adage, "It takes a village to raise a child." Um, there was good reason for that. And it wasn't that it was the whole village disciplining the child. It wasn't that the whole village needed to, point out all the child's faults. No, it was that if, you see a kid doing something stupid and they're doing something stupid, you say, "Hey kid, you're doing something stupid. You shouldn't do that."
Yep.
You can't even say that in our society today. You just talked to my kid. What did you say to my kid? I'm calling the cops on you. Right? So it's a very wild detachment from, actually resolving conflict at any sort of logical, reasonable, personal level, and just, again, a mass appeal to authority.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like I had a recent experience where you, you know, uh it's interesting to interact with different cultures, and it's very easily to misinterpret what someone from a different culture thinks about you. It's it's
Oh yeah.
it's it's almost impossible to know what the other people think about you. But in this particular instance, there was a family who they're Japanese, and I'm a white guy from California.
Mhm.
From a somewhat of a non-religious background, I guess, but just I grew up as a young kid in California. I used to surf, and
Mhm.
probably a lot like everybody grows up in the United States, be it whatever culture you're from. At least in my view, I had this idea of, I was taught that if you're going to say something, don't ever say something to somebody you wouldn't say in front of their face.
Mhm.
And if you do, say whatever you want, but that person might punch you. And if you said something, you probably deserve
Right.
to get punched. So
Right.
they're able to fight back. So be careful what you say to someone, and don't do that unless you say it to their face. And
Mhm.
so, you know, you don't realize that you carry that with you for forever, it seems like. And so recently we were at a school event for my daughter, and I had asked the parents of the little girl, "Hey, guys should come over sometime. Maybe your daughter come over for dinner." And then the little girl says, "No, my parents think that your daughter's a bad influence." I was like, "Really?" And on some level, I'm like, "That's weird," because I was just talking to them a second ago, and we were having this nice conversation, and they
Mhm.
were complimenting
Mhm.
me. And then all of a sudden, it hit me like, "Oh, I see. Like, you really don't like me at all. You're just pretending." And
Mhm.
who am I? Like, is that wrong? Not really. I mean, I mean, it is kind of for me a little bit like I was taught that you don't do that. And so I talked to my friend who was Japanese and I told him that and he started laughing. He goes, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. In my house, I'm Japanese. In my house, you're really nice. Like you save face. But when you get home, you just unload and you tell that person exactly what it is, how they should live. And it's a more of an authoritarian style. But when you're
Mhm.
out, you don't ever do that because you wouldn't want to get punched in the face, you know?"
Right. Yeah, because somebody's liable to punch you in the face. Exactly. Yep.
But it's an interesting concept to think about narratives and different cultural ways of dealing with community like we were talking about. And that's, you might ask someone for a cup of sugar but you wouldn't tell them you're a bad influence or something like that. But yeah, when it comes to community, it's difficult when you have people who are bred and live on the same foundation. It's even more difficult when you live in an area where you're living in two different lifeboats and you're still trying to communicate. So yeah, I agree with the whole community narrative.
Yeah. And I've been in some small beach communities where it still has that core communal element to things.
Yeah.
Everybody's an acquaintance essentially is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And so everybody has a degree of cordiality that's, you know, uh, just above, treating everybody as a stranger.
Yeah.
But just that little increment of hey, I recognize that face changes the entire dynamic of how the community acts. Because now when those people go talk, they're like, oh yeah, that's Bill. He does blah 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 blah. He's a volunteer firefighter at the thing.
Yeah.
Well, now when there's a problem, somebody knows to call Bill as opposed to trying to go through all these channels because Bill's a volunteer firefighter and he knows what to do in this situation. And so those types of that communication that evolves in a community is you know from my estimation paramount to making a successful community. And when we get to these communities that we have these days, I mean, we're awash in a sea of people and cars. um, and even though somebody might have lived on the same block for 20 years, they're still not the acquaintance that you wave to.
Yeah.
And that's the case especially in a larger city like in New York or in LA or something like that.
Yeah. It seems to me that if we can agree that in a small community like that, there is a tighter sense of community, I think it's fair to say that diversity, depending on how we define diversity, let's just say we say diversity as bringing in people from different cultures to this community.
Mm-hmm.
That does have a destabilizing effect, or at least it can, right? If you can't
it
be on
I
the same level.
Well, yeah, I'll give an interesting for instance. I was traveling in Trinidad and Tobago. I was on Tobago Island in a little town called Castara. Rainbows every other day on the little bay right there, just absolutely gorgeous. It's a small little fishing village. All the men are these giant dudes who pull the fishing net every day, and then they sell that catch to fishing boats that come by, and that's pretty much the economy of this little village. Well, um, some radical Islamic people moved to the island and set up shop. And they decided to pop up a mosque in this tiny little village. And to the destabilizing effect of that, everybody looked at them cross. Everybody. And it was a very interesting experience because they were clearly persona non grata in that place, but they had no, because of what they were trying to accomplish, they had no motivation to leave because their motivations for being there were not to be a part of a community. It was to take over a community.
Mm.
So yeah, you can have a massive destabilizing effect, especially if somebody has some malfarious or intent, right? Nefarious intent. That's what I was looking for. And so there's a lot to be said about that. But then again, that should go back to the strength of the community, the communication of the community. If
Yeah.
that community did have a communication system and was like, hey, and they were the authority for their community, as in they didn't have to go appeal to some higher power
Right.
to go
Right.
remove these people. Those destabilizing elements don't exist long, because
Right.
I've been in other communities that are very strong, and all of a sudden you'll see somebody comes in and somebody gets robbed in that community. Well, pretty much everybody within a day figures out who did the robbing,
Yeah.
and that person is gone. They disappeared. I don't know where they disappeared to, but I've seen a few people just disappear and not show back up.
Yep.
And so, depending on the community and what sort of authority they have onto themselves, I mean, we're talking like jungle beach towns, right? So who knows where those people actually
Yeah.
disappeared to? They might have busted them out. They might have busted them to the jungle.
Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
so again, it's that communal strength that allows the ability to have to not be destabilized by those nefarious intruders with malintent.
It's almost like an immune system. Like it's
Yeah,
willing to take in any sort of substance as long as that can make it into part of the body. However, if a substance comes in that is foreign and poison, then it gets expelled.
that's right. Yeah, it's a perfect analogy. Yeah.
Man. Well, I am having an absolute blast, and I could keep talking, but I have to go do some other things. And I feel like every one of our conversations have been really rewarding and really rich. And my hope is that the same way you and I are building relationship by talking about the book and the ideas that it leads to, I'm hopeful that people listening or watching to this can participate in the relationship by seeing it grow and reaching out to us. And so I want to extend that invitation to everybody listening and watching. I'm going to put the links below. Please reach out to us, or we're doing it live, so you can even come to some of the platforms where it's live, and those will be in the description as well, and talk to us.
Yeah, put us on the hot seat.
Yeah, we'd love that. We would definitely love it. And so where can people find you, and what is it that you would like to leave people with this week to think about?
Well, BenjaminCGeorge.com is the main hub of everything. Final thought for this week is words are important.
Yeah, that's the best way to leave it on. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for spending some time with us, and we will see you guys next week. That's what we got for today. Aloha.
Aloha.